The Embedding Formative Assessment Programme is a programme developed by SSAT in partnership with Dylan William and Siobhan Leary. And it's a 2-year professional development programme focused on the idea of teaching and learning communities, groups of teachers coming together on a monthly basis to change their behaviours and change their practice focused around formative assessment. Last year, in 2019, the Education Endowment Foundation released a report into the effectiveness of the EFA programme. They monitored the progress of 25,000 secondary students. And what they found is that, on average, schools that were involved in the EFA programme added an extra 2 months of additional progress onto their attainment table scores. So we know that this works. I'm going to pass over to Michael now, who has, as I said, has been involved with the EFA programme in a junior school for the best part of a decade. So first of all, Michael, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and a bit more about Hunters Bar?
Okay. I started teaching in the Northeast, small Church of England school. I was geography and history coordinator there. And then I moved to Sheffield. And the second school I was at, I started as PE subject lead, then moved on to maths, and then eventually onto the SLT. And then a job came up at the school called Hunters Bar, which looked really interesting. And it was a TLR position. So I moved here, and I think it was about 15 years ago now, though it's about scary to think about that sort of timescale. I started as a TLR, and then eventually the assistant headship opportunity came up, which I took and was successful in. And then I moved on to deputy. And then finally, I think 3 years ago, I moved on to be the head teacher. So that was kind of my journey through education. Nothing stunning, nothing interesting, just the general kind of run-of-the-mill things. Opportunities came up and I just took advantage of them. I never had any kind of desire to be a head teacher. And then when the position arose, I hummed and hawed for a long time. And I was in a car with another head, and he said to me, so what happens if somebody new comes in and said, we're not going to do embedding formative assessment anymore. We're going to do something different. And that was the thing that spurred me on to think, I can't let this go. I've invested too much of my time. I believe too much in it just to let it disappear like that. So that was one of the main catalysts for why I took the decision. Hunters Bar as a school is really interesting. It's quite diverse. We take from the local area less than 50%, which means that we take from about 9 different postcodes across the city of Sheffield, which brings in people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, which makes for a really interesting mix. So it's a very vibrant, lively place. Lots of opinions from parents and children flying around that are not always in line with one another, which is one of the reasons why the embedding formative assessment package really appealed to us, because we were looking for some certainty within this ethos of everybody having different views and different opinions. No matter what we asked parents, we would have a continuum and we'd have strong views on either side. So we were desperate to find something that would support our views as we kind of maneuvered through that environment.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And you said that, you know, one of your kind of deciding factors in becoming a head was not to lose the work you'd done on embedding formative assessment. What first drew you to the programme?
It was really just an epiphany. We'd done creative partnerships for 3 years. So the previous head was very much forward thinking. And we'd had 3 years of doing creative partnerships, which really opened up our thinking and found that there was a world of education outside of school, which is something that I hadn't really recognized. The way that things used to work is somebody would go on a course, or someone would hear from someone else down the road that had gone on a course, and then people would just adapt things from there. So myself and the assistant head was sent to hear somebody called Professor Dylan William speaking in Sheffield about something called embedding formative assessment. We knew nothing about it. We were just told from somebody as part of the creative partnerships, we think your next step should be to look into formative assessment and Professor Dylan William. So the opportunity came up, we went along, and that day is still burned in my mind because it just changed everything that I thought about education and schools. And suddenly Professor Williams said, there's this world out there of research that can help guide your decision making within school. And I didn't even recognize that that was out there. Hadn't got a clue. So that really just opened up my mind. And on that day, we just got increasingly more excited about what we were hearing, and particularly just that clarity and that assurance that there was things that you could base decisions on that had somebody had spent time looking at it, researching it, and coming with the best probable answer to a problem that you might have. So we raced back to school, and I remember the next morning we burst into the head teacher's office and we just said, we've got to do this thing, it's amazing. And we laid it all out for her, and fortunately she just said, yeah, go with it, see where we get. So we bought the package there and then, and we started that journey that's taken us to now, which is we're in our 10th year. And my enthusiasm has not waned, my certainty around it has not waned, and I've read a lot wider in terms of education, but also change management, habit forming, and everything I read just reinforces how smart this package actually is, and how really well thought out it is, and it matches not just education research, but wider research as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Michael. So I'm thinking back to that moment 10 years ago when you had that epiphany, sat in a conference centre in Sheffield, and then when you sort of rushed back to school and were certain you were going to do it. Once you started implementing the programme in that first couple of months, that first year, what was the immediate impact or the initial impact? And perhaps kind of focusing on the impact it had on the teachers in your school, the children and the learners, and the general school culture and ethos.
Okay, so yeah, obviously within schools, generally people have quite a short-term view of things, and they want to buy a package or do something that's going to have an immediate impact on learners. It was very clear from the things we were reading that that's really an unrealistic expectation. So we were looking for those early indicators of success, which is part of the package. I think initially we were just looking for teachers to actually take control of this and start to embed some of the practice. So I think one of the first things we saw was the initial enthusiasm from teachers when we presented the pack to them. And there was an overwhelming sense of, why wouldn't we do this? Based on what you've told us, it's a no-brainer. So we were looking for volunteers, really, not conscripts to start with, but everybody just said, we've got to do this. So that was the initial thing. What we started to see within those first set of meetings, the first 2 or 3 times we ran them, people were really quite excited about this opportunity to talk about teaching and learning, something that we found we barely spent a moment doing. And it was quite shocking now looking back. Why wouldn't you spend time talking about teaching and learning? It is the bread and butter of what you do. And yet the staff meetings, the training up to that point, we hadn't had those opportunities. So I think staff really enjoyed that and felt there was a focus more on them as a professional, as an educator, rather than just being a teacher. And that was the first initial feeling. Then within school, we started to see things like no hands up started to become very quickly adopted. So within the first 3 or 4 months, there was a slow burn, and then eventually we were walking around school and seeing that children were not raising their hands to answer questions. Lollipop sticks were everywhere. Green and red and amber flashcards were everywhere. So those very basic sort of building blocks that you first start to see were becoming prevalent. In terms of the children, we didn't really see that impact until probably at the end of the first year, where we started to ask the children, what do you see the difference has been over the first year of doing this program? And their initial input from their ideas was that they felt they had more of a voice. We had, interestingly, some pushback from some children, and they were the children that generally were the ones that would raise their hands and have the answers. And they were frustrated that they didn't get that opportunity as much as they had before to always be the voice answering the questions. So there was a little bit of pushback from the children with that. But that disappeared really within halfway through the second year. They just accepted that this is now how we do things. And we also became a little bit more skilled in ensuring that we were able to get other people's opinions, and it wasn't just based on a lolly stick or a random name generator. We had those other opportunities and other strategies to build upon different ideas and to evolve the class in more discussion. So I think that was kind of what we saw initially. Those early indicators where the ethos was starting to develop. Teachers felt more professional, children started to see the benefits of it and started to accept it, and we started to see the strategies being embedded across the school.
Brilliant, thanks, Michael. When some people, when they hear terms like no hands up, lollipop sticks, flashcards, will think, oh, well, this is just a gimmick. This is just a set of gimmicks. What would you say to people that might throw that at you?
I would say you have to start there. That lovely phrase that comes from Chip and Dan Heath's book, Switch, is you need to act into a new way of thinking instead of thinking into a new way of acting. And Dylan uses this phrase a lot as well. And I think that sums it up really nicely. If you're wanting to do anything, you know, if people are wanting to lose weight, you think about it and it seems very obvious. And yet it's incredibly difficult. It's about forming habits, really. And the idea with formative assessment is you start to develop these techniques and you embed it over the course of a month, and then you get a new technique, you embed that. And eventually that starts to change your mindset and it starts to change the way that you're thinking about things. It was very interesting. Something hit me from feedback from a teacher midpoint through the second year. And he said that now these techniques are starting to be embedded. They're melting into the background, and now he's just AFLing lessons. So when he was planning lessons, he was just doing it from this new mindset. But that had only come because we'd started to slowly embed these techniques within our practice. And I think it's thinking about whole scale things, it's the systems that create the ethos and culture of a school. And with organizations, it's very difficult to say, this is the ethos, let's live by it. People live by that ethos, by the systems that they follow and the communication and those sorts of things. And that's why this works so well. So that's why I would say it's not gimmicks, it's embedding those systems to allow for the ethos to develop later.
Great, thank you. At the start, I probably very poorly explained the format of the programme. You know it far better than I do. Could you just give us a brief sort of outline of what the programme entails and the type of activities that you are asking staff to do when you start the programme?
Okay, so the programme really is based around teacher learning communities, which we've been able to do, and it's suggested that you do every month. We've done that as taking the place of one of our staff meetings or professional development meetings, and we've given 2 meetings every month over to this because we realise and recognise the value of it. So these meetings start with a general introduction, and then you begin by reflecting on the particular technique you've been trying to embed over the last month. And it might be something simple as you've been working on your wait time between asking a question and getting a response from children. So you will give feedback to the group about the particular technique you've been doing, and the group will then critique and ask questions about that to make you think a little bit deeper. Things such as, well, how was that formative? How did you alter your lesson based on that feedback you were getting? In the meantime, within the course of that month, you will also have been observed by a partner at least once, more if possible, and you will have had a chance to have a conversation with your partner about what they saw. The key bit about this is that your partner's not there to tell them what they think you should have done. They're there simply as a mirror to you. So you control what you want your partner to see. So if it was wait time, for example, you may give them a stopwatch, a clipboard, and say, I want you to time the gap between me asking the question and receiving the answers. We find because of cognitive bias, we often think we're doing things that we're not. And we often think we're not doing things that we are. So the purpose of your partner is to hold that mirror up and say, this is what I saw. I saw this, this, and this, without judgment, but just simply repeating back what they watched. And that's incredibly useful. And we found that because of that, we are a lot more aware of our own bias. And looking at things through the child's lens has been something that's developed in school because of that. So you'll feed back to your group, you'll have the critique, and then you'll start to examine a piece of research. And that might be a short video clip. It could be somebody's blog. It could be a research paper. It could be a summary of that. And you will look at the research and you will then, whichever way you want to use it, and we often use AFL techniques, or embedding formative assessment techniques, as a way to engage with that research. So we might use bus stop method or something like that. But you'll discuss that piece of research until you have a better understanding of where this has come from. That gives you that little bit of certainty. Then based on the research, there are a number of techniques that are pulled out from that. So you may have been looking at feedback, and you might have looked at a research paper on feedback. You then have maybe half a dozen techniques linked to feedback. As an individual, then you decide which one is best for you, and this is where the choice bit comes in. And this is really empowering for staff to know that they are the ones that are in charge of their own professional development. So they will look at those techniques, and based on their experience or their confidence levels or their teaching style, they will choose one that they want to embed over the next 4 weeks. They will then sit down and plan within the meeting how they're aiming to do that. So which lessons is this going to happen? How often am I going to do it? How am I going to maybe just tweak it to match the needs of my learners and me as a style, as a practitioner? You'll then speak to your partner about it within the meeting and share what you're going to do, and then share with the wider group. And that's a really good opportunity for people to say, I've chosen that one. I was thinking of doing it this way, and having a really nice discussion at that point about your pedagogical choices. And then eventually at the end of the meeting, you will agree with your partner when you're going to be observed teaching this technique, and also what sort of feedback you want to get back. And that meeting usually lasts somewhere between 75 and 90 minutes. And it's just such a good opportunity to have those discussions that will sometimes pop into your head, but you don't have the opportunity to do that and share it with somebody else.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. That was far more comprehensive explanation.
Sorry, I've probably gone on a bit.
No. That's absolutely perfect. Thank you. Thinking now about your role as a leader within this. So we've looked at the kind of the process from a teacher point of view. But as a leader, how has being involved in this program influenced your thinking around both assessment, but also professional learning, CPD, whatever we want to call that sort of ongoing learning?
Yeah. Okay. So I think just to dial it back a little bit, what we started finding was that everything we did was based on embedding formative assessment. So my assemblies on a Monday, I asked for feedback from the children, randomly choose children to give responses. There's a stimulus. We use those kind of techniques. And then also within our own professional development, if somebody's running a PDM, a professional development meeting, they use those formative assessment techniques within those meetings. So we're always looking for evidence of understanding from the learners, whether they're children or teachers. We're looking at what sort of feedback we give. We're looking for people who work together. All of those sorts of things feed into it, which is really interesting. That's just become part and parcel of how we operate as a school. In terms of me personally as a leader, just starting to look through that door of evidence and research has just completely changed the way that I view education, really. And I would say it's widened things considerably, as well as got me to slow down with decision making. So I've become a little bit of an education geek, and quite a few of us in school have gone down the whole Twitter route, looking at what people are saying on there. It can be a bit of an echo chamber, so you've got to be careful. But you find those voices, you find those individuals that you feel that other people have respect for. So people like Daniel Willingham, David Weston of the TDT, you hear these people speak and it resonates with the things you're reading. But sometimes it also gives you a different interpretation of things or a different perspective. So it just starts to open up your educational landscape, really. And I think the two biggest things that's changed for me and for a school is that we're looking at things very much over the longer term. So our school development plan is based on 3, looking maybe 5 years in advance, whereas previously we were doing, let's say, for example, we would do feedback and would say, we'll do that in a year. Right, we've done feedback. Let's move on to something else. Let's move on to boys writing. We'll do that for a year. Let's move on to something else. And we found that on reflection, 3-4 years later, we were coming back to the same problem again because very little has actually shifted. So instead, we'll take something, for example, oracy has been a focus of the school, and we're in our second year of our 3-year program of oracy. And initially we said, this is going to last for 3 years. Let's look at how we're going to plan this out sensibly over time. Let's use the EF implementation model as a basis for how we do things. So that longer view of things has helped us slow down and spend a lot more time thinking. It also, to quote Stephen Covey, we've kept the main thing the main thing. So a real focus on the things that we think will make the biggest difference, which is why the embedding formative assessment practice is still number one for what we do, because we examine the research, we look at the evidence, and that still seems to be the one thing that will make the biggest difference to our learners. So I think that wider view of the landscape of education, but also outside, looking at business, looking at, as I said before, how people adopt habits, how change affects people and how best to plan for that. All of that, I think, has made me more of a rounded leader, not just a head teacher in the school.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I think, again, one of Dylan's sort of off-quoted phrases is, the idea that almost anything you do as a teacher is going to add value, unless you're a really terrible teacher. Almost everything you do will add value. So it's how you make those decisions about what is going to add the most value. And as you said, EFA is that thing that has the evidence and the research behind it, and continues to draw on the latest evidence. So that's really helpful. Thank you. Many primary schools or sort of other junior schools and infant schools might be considering joining the Embedding Formative Assessment Programme. What advice would you give to schools that may be considering it, both in terms of maybe why they should consider it, but also if they do, some sort of top tips for ensuring that it is successful?
I'd probably start by asking the question, what do you think is the best way of improving your learner outcomes? And then based on that question, we'll find out where they are in their thinking. And then I would then say that based on the strongest evidence from a variety of sources, it would seem that if you can embed formative assessment in your teacher's pedagogy, that will lead to the best outcomes for your learners. And I still can't find anything out there that suggests there's something better than this. It encapsulates all the research. You just have to look at the EAF toolkit and you see feedback number 1, and you look at the 5 key strategies of formative assessment, and they're all there within that research. Therefore, I would say to leaders that if you are serious about improving the quality of your teaching, which is the one thing that's going to make the biggest impact on your learners, there's nowhere else to look. That's how I would present it, really. It seems a no-brainer once you examine the evidence. You have to be wary, of course, of the evidence, because you look at something like feedback and you think, oh, great, that's the golden bullet, let's do feedback. And then you find that in Kluger and Denise's study that we're looking at maybe 38% of times feedback was used, it was actually detrimental to learning. So you have to look beyond just that initial title. So I would pose the question. I would then say, here's the evidence, and then you make the decision. And then in terms of things you need to consider, I think as a school, you need to have some basics in place first. If you've got a very fluid staffing structure, and if you've got huge issues with behavior, things like that, I wouldn't be encouraging you to start to look at this right now. I think you have to have those basics in place, because all that will happen is this will get sidetracked, because those bigger issues, those immediate issues will just raise their head and knock it to the side. If you have those basics in place, then I think what you need absolutely is the leadership of the school to believe in this fully and to make it a priority. Time is our biggest commodity, and you've only got a certain amount of time to do things. And when you start to examine that yourself, you realize that we all do far too much. And you've got to strip it right back to what are the basics. And for me, number 1 has to be the quality of teaching in school. So I would want the leaders in the school to absolutely wholeheartedly agree and believe in this model, to have spent time looking at the evidence, questioned it themselves, and to say, do I fully believe in this? Critique it, because just my view doesn't mean that I'm right. I've tried, it's really hard when you believe in something so much, your own bias kicks in all the time. But I keep trying to critique it and think, is there something better out there? Is there something else that could improve this? I would always encourage people to do that. And then a little trick that we've been using, which is quite nice, is to do a pre-mortem, which means that you plan your thing forward and then you say, right, at the end of this process, it's all gone wrong. Why has it gone wrong? And then you work back and you start to put those things in place and you plan to try to alleviate those problems from occurring. I think we did it ourselves. We drove it ourselves without any support. I think we would have been further on in those initial 2 years had we had external support just guiding us through things. I think that's why the SSAT plan is a really good one, because you don't know what you don't know. And things will come up and you will see those common issues that are barriers sometimes to the problem. If somebody's already worked through that themselves, they can support you in getting around that a lot quicker.
Brilliant, thanks, Michael. And as you alluded to there, part of the EFA program from SSAT, which has gone through various iterations over the 10 years you've been doing it, includes a dedicated mentor who will be someone who has gone through the program and will offer support in various ways during the 2 years, but including a full bespoke day at the end of each of the years, which will do both a sort of, I suppose, a post-mortem, that sounds very negative, but a kind of a review of the year, but also that pre-mortem, so looking forward to planning the next stages for development and looking for where those, where some of those challenges might be and mitigating those. So thank you for mentioning that. And sort of finally, really, I started our conversation by saying that, with potentially the imminent reopenings of schools to a wider group of children in the coming weeks, my view very strongly is that, embedding formative assessment is more important than ever, because perhaps in an unprecedented way in most teachers' careers, children will have had very, very different experiences during lockdown, and will have very, very different levels of knowledge and application and skills. Would you share that? And how are you thinking that as a school that's really embedding formative assessment, you will use those strategies as more children start to return to school?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, we need to consider mental health, and we need to have a curriculum that's designed to be supportive and also responsive to children and adults' needs, because teachers as well will have suffered through this process. After saying that, the gap has got to have increased for those vulnerable learners, and that's our biggest concern in all of this, apart from if we take the public health aspect out of it. And therefore, what we've got to do is, as quickly as possible, find out what those gaps are and then do something about it. The danger I expect is that we might think the best way to do that is just to give a load of tests out and then find out what they know from those tests. And that I can't see being a really good way forward. Therefore, a teacher that has a lot of things in their toolkit to be able to pull out children's understanding and actually do something with it, I think we'll be in a strong position. And we had a governors meeting last night, and I sort of said that this is why I feel we're in a strong position coming back, because we do have teachers that are skilled in these techniques and have a lot of things in their toolbox that they can use, where children will still see it as being different, as being interesting, but we're still getting to the point of what actually do you understand. Always start with where the learner is at is an obvious starting point, and I think we're in a good position to do that. So yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with what you've said.
Absolutely, and of course, if you weren't using formative assessment strategies, and you were doing some sort of hands up, there'll be children who will be desperate to share their experiences over the last few months, and there'll be children who really don't want to for various reasons. And of course, that's where, as you said, having a toolbox of activities to really get to the heart of what children understand is so crucially important. Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you for your time. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I've learned a lot about the programme myself, and certainly how it's been applied in your setting. Just finally to say thank you again from all of us at SSAT, and wishing you and all of your school community safety and health during this very difficult time. But thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.